15th Brumaire, 1799, Napoleon became the first consul as part of a team of 3 consuls. The constitution, as it was revised later, virtually gave all power to the first consul. At least he had succeeded in arrogating all power to himself. The constitution was put to vote, 3 million voted in favor, only 15,000 against it. 3 years later, in 1802, Napoleon made himself a consul for life, and in 1804 he became the Emperor of France, thus destroying the Republic which was inaugurated in 1792. Napoleon was driven, first of all, by an insatiable ambition. If there is a keynote to Napoleon's career, it was his ambition. This is what had seen Napoleon rise from a corporal to the position of first consul by 1799. A second force that molded Napoleon's career as the ruler of France was his ability to combine the revolution with what went on before it. This is how Napoleon was able to give France abiding institutions and was able to recruit the support of the majority of people, at least for a while. A third key to his career was his drive for expansion. Napoleon was forever looking beyond the frontier. He had started by leading the Revolutionary Army. The first job of the Revolutionary War was to defend la patrie, the country, the nation. But later, under the Directory, it really went over the frontier and established associated republics. Later, between 1800 and 1807-8, Napoleon virtually took French army to all parts of Europe and redrew the political map of the continent. And the final force that ultimately went into the unmaking of Napoleon was a coalition of European powers. England remained a steadfast enemy, but it was ultimately the coalition of European powers, the Fourth Coalition, that defeated Napoleon at Waterloo in 1815. Napoleon's career can also be seen in 4 phases. The first phase from 1799 to 1804 was the phase of the consulate. Arguably, it was the most creative phase of Napoleon's career. All the abiding institutions were created during this time, and France was given a new and solid administrative base. Indeed, it laid the foundation of a new state in France. The second period from 1804 to 7 can be seen as the period of expansion in Europe. It probably started with his brilliant victory at Austerlitz, but it continued beyond and ended with the Treaty of Tilsit with the Tsar Alexander of Russia. Napoleon now stood at the peak of his career. The period from 1807-8 to 1812 can be seen as the beginning of the end, a period of decline. The continental system proved to be a disaster. It worked more against its creator rather than the target that he had aimed at. It was also the period when quote-unquote national resistance started in Spain and Germany. Finally, the phase from 1812 to 15 saw his final eclipse from power. It started with a disastrous Russian campaign in 1812 and ended with his final defeat at Waterloo. First of all, we have to see him not as a total disruption of the revolution, but at a level, a continuation of it. We may begin by looking at the way he reorganized France. Napoleon realized that he had to bring in stability and peace. He had to achieve victory abroad and restore stability and order inside the country. This stability and order did not relate only to law and order. From the abysmal fiscal situation to bringing the different political factions under control was a very tall task indeed. Lefebvre suggested that Napoleon in his government somewhat emulated the principles of the Committee of Public Safety of the Jacobin period. It was probably partially true. Napoleon ultimately did establish a personal dictatorship, but in the bargain he did achieve quite a bit. Napoleon did not rule France as a military dictator, though there is no doubt about the dictatorial element in his government. He himself said, "I rule France not as a general, but because I believe I possess the civil qualities of a ruler." So it was as a civil ruler that Napoleon at least pretended to be ruling France. One difference may be noted at the outset. After a long time, France felt the impact of a unified political will. Let us now look at what he did. Napoleon did borrow from the earlier phases. For example, he took the secretariat from the directory and eventually converted it into a ministry of state. It is through this that he controlled the various departments of the government. He took from the Ancien regime the council. The council of state was for him a virtual laboratory of serious legal experimentation. The council of state had many very famous administrators like Roederer, Chaptal, Crétet, Fourcroy, etc. Some of them had Jacobin sympathies, some of them were even royalists, some were moderate revolutionaries. But it is men of talent that Napoleon tried to gather round him. And this endowed some of his work with a degree of permanence and sophistication. Napoleon, however, never allowed the council to discuss political situation. He always did appear to be the man in command. He kept the whole organization of France. France remained divided into 83 departments, but everywhere the old principle of decentralization, particularly something that the Constituent Assembly had carried to a great extent, was reversed, and it was centralization that was in place. The provinces were given in charge of a prefect. The prefects had been referred to by Godeshaw as little emperors, and to Tocqueville they were a resurrection of the intendants of the old regime. And in a way the prefects were the personal representatives of the first consul and then the emperor in the provinces. At the arrondissement and the cantonal level, the advisory councils retained simply advisory power. The actual power rested with those nominated by the first consul himself. Even the mayors in the communes were to be nominated, not elected. And in this way, we have an entirely new principle being introduced into the administration. The police was reorganized, and Fouché was in charge of the police department, and after him came Savary. There was a very famous Louis Nicolas Dubois, who was the prefect of finance. This is where Napoleon had to give immediate attention, because there was a whole lot of problem involved with the finances. It is said that at the inauguration of the consulate, only about 167,000 francs were left in the national treasury. Metal currency had all but disappeared. The Directory had earlier declared partial bankruptcy. Tax collection was irregular. Napoleon tried to undo all these irregularities, and he knew that tax collection had to be made regular. It is a remarkable achievement that tax collection was regularized within a matter of years. He forced the tax collectors to deposit an advance, and that way some money came into the treasury to begin with. He extended some of the government monopolies, but what was accented was regularization of the collection of taxes. The nightmarish memory of the ASEAN was passing. Metal currency was back in circulation gradually, and it has been estimated that between 1799 and 1814, about 75 million of gold and silver currency was back in circulation. Napoleon even introduced a new franc of 5 grams. It was known as germinal franc, and the germinal franc remained a stable currency till 1914. In 1800, he established the Bank of France with the assistance of the banker Perregaux. Now there is no true opinion about the significance of the central bank that Napoleon had set up. This is where France had lagged behind England, for example, and this is a wrongful lacune that he was able to remove. In economy, Napoleon was more of a mercantilist than a free trader. He did not quite believe in free trade, but believed in a command economy and underlined the role of the state. He did encourage industrial activities and trading, but with the state always in mind. One of his basic objectives had been the extension of agriculture and the progress of agriculture under state patronage. His attitude was pro-employer rather than pro-employee. The old Le Chapelier law, which forbade any industrial action, was resuscitated. He asked the workers to carry the identity card of their employers, and in this one had detected a note of authoritarianism that was so dear to Napoleon. In education also, Napoleon continued the work of the revolution. The convention had made primary education nearly compulsory. The directory had started to bring in new secondary education. The École Polytechnique had already been set up. Napoleon gave accent on professional education, and new institutions were set up. There were primary educations, new state education, and indeed new secondary schools were to be also under the church after the agreement with the Pope, but there was the state control over education and the state-run schools as well. His intention was to bring in some elite institutions into the entire education system of France, and his very famous contribution was the creation of the lycée, or as elite secondary school, which continues in France even today. But his most significant contribution was the final codification of law. The civil code, which was renamed as the Code Napoleon in 1807, provided France with a new legal system and gave France legal unity, which had eluded it for a very long time. Indeed, France, on the eve of the revolution, represented a mosaic of legal system. There was Roman law in the south, customary law in the north. This apart, there were a plethora of church edicts, royal decrees, feudal legislation, and to rescue France from this legal anarchy would have taken a great deal indeed. A beginning was made during the revolution. Codification of law started. The convention had codified around in excess of 700 articles. The directive extended it to 1100, but it was Napoleon's personal intervention and his regular attendance of the meetings of the council where this was being thrashed, that expedited the making of the civil code and the Code Napoleon. Now, what would be the basis of this law? Would it be the principles of natural law? Would it be the new ideas germinated by the Enlightenment? Would it be the old kind of basis that France had, or would it be a reintroduction of the Roman law? Now, obviously, the way the convention and the directory looked at it would have differed from Napoleon. What Napoleon did here as well as elsewhere was to combine two elements. He did bring in the revolutionary idealism, the ideas of enlightenment, and combined it with his natural inclination towards authoritarianism. The result, however, while it did include authoritarian tendencies, did provide France with a legal unity and a legal system that exists even today. What is significant is that the new ideas of the revolution of social and legal equality had not only been preserved but given a permanence that the revolution failed to endow it with. He did not allow for liberty, but there was provision for liberty against arbitrary arrest as well. The Code Napoleon preserved social equality in the sense that career was to be open to talent. Now, this was a very significantly felt slogan of the revolution. It recognized civil marriage, divorce on grounds of incompatibility, equal division of property among the children, property inheritance of illegitimate children in certain cases. Only 25% of property could be by will bequeathed to anyone outside the family. But while here there was total legal equality, there was no disabilities to be suffered anymore. Now, this is where the revolution was certainly continued. But he built his authoritarianism into this by introducing the Roman principle of pater familias. The father was given the control of the family. Even wives were put under the control of their husbands. Right? Now, in this way, these are the elements of authoritarianism, but overall, the Code Napoleon certainly provided France with a new legal system that preserved a good part of the revolution. But while Napoleon preserved equality, it was not liberty that he really got enshrined into this legal system. He did also break away from the revolutionary system in certain cases. He was against the individualism of the revolution. He described it as so many grains of sand. Instead, he wanted what he called pillars of granite. He wished to introduce the old intermediaries of the Ancien regime to create a cluster of interests who would be attached to him. They would receive honors, privilege, and would in return ensure the loyalty of the people. And this loyalty would have meant subservience to the first consul and later the emperor himself. Next comes his agreement with the Pope, the Concordat of 1801. In his personal attitude, Napoleon was probably even a Voltairean skeptic. He was not very enthusiastic about religion, but he had witnessed that for over a decade now, France lay hopelessly divided between the Jewing and the non-Jewing clergy. That the Catholic powers of Europe, as well as the fairly predominant Catholic opinion inside France, remained against the government. His campaigns in Egypt and Italy convinced him of the utility of religion. He felt religion is necessary, but it must always be in the hands of the government. And this is what he intended to achieve now. He could clearly see the advantages of coming to an understanding with the Pope. It would neutralize Catholic opinion and by enlisting the support of the Pope would endow the new regime with a solidity and support from even the Catholics. For example, the old tradition of counter-revolution in the Ware region, the peasants could be pacified, and through his agents he could see that the bourgeois skepticism notwithstanding, the peasants still retained their loyalty to the church. So he struck this agreement with the Pope in 1801. It said that Roman Catholicism would be recognized as the religion of the majority of Frenchmen. The old distinction between the juring and the non-juring clergy would be obliterated by all bishops, all clerics would be asked to resign. The first consul would nominate the bishops and the Pope would simply institute them. The bishops will nominate and institute the other clergy. So in a way, Napoleon found a reconciliation with the Catholic Church, but it was more a political reconciliation perhaps than a religious reconciliation. He did not wish to interfere with the religious life of France, but simply wanted the discord to come to an end so that he can use a larger base of support amongst the French men and women. The state would accept the responsibility of paying salaries, etc. to everyone. And therefore, the church virtually became a department of the state. The Gallican principles were introduced in order to preserve the special status that the French church had always enjoyed even within the Roman Catholic world. Indeed, it lasted till 1907 when the state and the church were separated in France. Now, his achievement here has been seen variously. Gabriel Hanotto saw in this Napoleon's reconciliation with the past and also felt that it gave him a new source of power. Now, Hanotto would consider this to be a political achievement. It was a political necessity that led Napoleon to achieve this Concordat. But nevertheless, he did heal the discordance that had characterized religious life in France as a result of the civil constitution of the clergy. These are the major reorganizations that Napoleon had achieved. And indeed, we know that when he was coronated as Emperor of France, the Pope had come. This is again immortalized in the painting of David. And the Pope was to have coronated him. Though the last moment Napoleon took the crown from the hand of the Pope and put it on his head himself. Napoleon was seeking to replicate what Charlemagne had done 1,000 years before. The agreement with the Pope had another very important repercussion. The confiscated property had been bought by many people. The agreement with the Pope confirmed the sale of Bien Nationaux. All the national property that had been sold and bought by others would be confirmed. They would continue in the enjoyment of their property. And in this way, Napoleon had preserved the revolution to a large extent. Equality open to talent, a career open to talent, all this had been enshrined. Now, in the aristocracy that he had created, we shall see later, but most of these were men of talent. It is men of talent, of property, of wealth that Napoleon got together in a new notability. Whether he created a new social order is something we shall see later. But Napoleon has to be, as I have argued earlier, understood in terms of the historical forces which shaped to make him, to direct him. Whatever his personal destiny, Napoleon was a part of the history of the French Revolution. His relationship with that legacy in many ways defined him. Napoleon did move away from the revolution at several points. We shall see later at which point he might have departed from the revolution. François Furet, I just quote a little from him. He called him the Louis XIV of the democratic state. I'm quoting, quote, following a very French dialectic, the same man who had deified the abstract sovereignty of the state had made it more fragile by personifying it as if it had resided entirely within him. Napoleon was the Louis XIV of the democratic state, unquote, François Furet. But this appears to be an anachronism. Napoleon was not the Louis XIV of a democratic state. Napoleon did create a new state. He established his dictatorship on the basis of what has been called an egalitarian despotism. To compare him with the Bourbons is an anachronism. So what really endured beyond the fall of Napoleon was the administrative and social structure that he put in his place to preserve the revolution. The law codes, the Concordat, the prefects, the lycée. The inauguration of the empire, it may be argued, was the first violent